I'm a part of a small group of cryptozoologists, and a few years ago, we had an experience in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey that I reckon your audience might find deeply intriguing. Before I launch into the story, let me set some context. We're not your typical monster hunters. We started off as a bunch of science nerds at Rutgers University, with a shared love for the weird and unexplainable. Our fascination brought us together, and before long, we were baptized as cryptozoologists by our beloved biology professor. Over the years, we've had our shares of adventures, mostly chasing obscure species, documenting strange migration patterns and the likes. However, nothing measures up to the experience we had during the winter of 2013. The adventure started when a wealthy businessman, whose name we are not allowed to share, heard about our group. He was a bit odd, but so were we. He had a passion for the bizarre and a burning curiosity about the world of cryptids. He was convinced that the infamous Jersey Devil existed, and he had an offer we could hardly resist. He was well off and offered a monetary reward for any credible proof of the existence of the creature. Now, it's not that we hadn't heard about the Jersey Devil before. The supernatural creature was right up our alley. The beast, as large as a horse but bizarrely devilish, with glowing eyes and bat-like wings, had been a tale shared around late-night campfires for centuries. The reports varied, of course, adding to its mystique. Some spoke of horns, whereas others of a skeletal exterior that gave it an eerie, goblin-like appearance. For some, the creature was known to emit a harsh, sulfur-like smell that hung in the air long after it disappeared. Each of us in our team had different motivations to accept the challenge. Of course, the promise of the reward was enticing. But more than the money, we were enamored by the idea of potential fame and the rare opportunity to finally prove the existence of a cryptid to the world. Pete, our team leader, was particularly keen on getting his hands dirty and was eager to venture into the Pine Barrens. But we needed to bring back hard evidence, something more than just blurry pictures and hearsay. To track a creature as elusive as the Jersey Devil in the vast 1.1 million acres of the Pine Barrens was no small task. We spent days poring over old records, witness accounts, and local folklore, identifying key spots where the creature had been sighted most frequently. Our plan was illustrious. Not only would we venture into the area, but we'd camp there for a week, moving deeper into the heart of the Barrens each day. We were arming ourselves with thermal cameras, drones, and the best video recorders money could buy in 2013. No stone was left unturned. No cost was too much. The excitement among us was mounting as the day of our big search came closer. Little did we know, nothing could have prepared us for what was about to unfold in the depths of the Barrens. It was about 2 days into our Pine Barrens adventure when it started. We were sitting around the crackling fire. Suddenly, we heard a sound that made our blood freeze. It was a bone-chillingly strange, high-pitched cry that echoed throughout the forest. It was something none of us had ever heard before in all our expeditions. Our drones and cameras sprung to life in anticipation, but the creature did not appear. The third night was when we first saw it, or more accurately, smelt it. A stench of sulfur filled the air, so strong that it instantly killed our appetite. The smell lingered for a while, but then began to dissipate. We couldn't find any cause or source of the smell, and we stopped searching after it seemed to disappear. We were just tucking ourselves into our sleeping bags, heads filled with fresh stories when a cry echoed out. Whatever it was close to our camp. But it wasn't just the call that froze us in place. We were assembled together in our main tent when an enormous shadow passed over us. It obscured the moonlight through the thin fabric of our tent. As it got closer, we realized what we were looking at. It was the chilling outline of a winged beast. Braving instinct, Pete and I grabbed our thermal cameras and stepped outside. And there it was, an image that it's as fresh today as it was then. A creature about 6 feet tall stood not 50 feet from our camp, its long, lurid tongue lolled out of its mouth in the darkness, almost like a snake tasting the air. I knew right away we were looking at the devil. It seemed to have a skeletal exterior, or perhaps some sort of plate scales. I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. We had chased shadows and obscure species for the better part of our lives, But it was all just for fun. I never thought I'd actually encounter one like this. Fear was palpable in the air as the creature spread its wings. They were bat-like and membranous. I fumbled to get a steady shot despite my shaking hands, the red recording light glowing weakly in front of me. It was clear the creature didn't appreciate our intrusion, sending another petrifying screech our way, leaving us frozen in fear. Then, as sudden as it had appeared, it took off, leaving only the sulfuric stench and terror-filled silence in its wake. I'm not embarrassed to admit it. We packed up the very next morning. The cameras, drones, all our elaborately planned tracking routines. None of it mattered. No one wanted to be out there anymore. It was like the case of a dog chasing a car. It's there for the chase. It doesn't actually want to catch the car. But there we were. We had finally come face to face with one of the creatures we had been searching for. The Pine Barrens had chewed us up and spat us out, leaving a terrifying tail and 4 petrified men in its wake. We've often reflected on that night, each of us acknowledging that, in our chase for fame and validation, we had bitten off more than we could chew. So, does the Jersey Devil exist? After that expedition, our view tilted from skeptical scientists to reluctant believers. As for our buddy, the wealthy businessman, we offered him our recordings, but without the creature in plain sight, he didn't part with his money. But I can tell you one thing for certain. All the money in the world isn't worth a night spent out in the wild with the devil. I've got a wild encounter to share. We were on a family vacation in a remote cabin, in the heart of the Canadian wilderness. It was wintertime and the landscape was draped in a thick layer of brilliant white snow. We had packed ourselves into the family car and journeyed from the hustle of the city to the peace and tranquility of the great northern forests. It promised to be a perfect week of quality family time, away from the pressures of jobs, school, and traffic. Little did we know what we were getting ourselves into. As a father, I just wanted to give my kids an experience in nature, something more than just malls and movie theaters and theme parks. I wanted them to breathe fresh air, see stars in a black night sky. I wanted them to know the world was bigger than the concrete jungle we called home. My wife was skeptical at first, but she could see the longing in my eyes and the growing excitement in the kids. We all needed this. We pulled up to the cabin on a clear, cold day. The air was crisp and sharp, cutting through our winter wear with a rigorous chill. We blew smoke clouds into the air as we stepped outside. It was a beautiful escape, rustic, raw, and real. No television, no traffic noise, just the sounds of nature. It was exactly what I had hoped for. We settled in, choosing rooms and getting a fire going in the fireplace. The kids dashed in and out, getting used to their new playground. Snowball fights, building snowmen, everything was so alive and magical. The missus and I, well, we were content to just sit by the fire sipping hot cocoa. As the sun began to set, we called it a day. We played a quick board game together with the kids in front of the fire. The night passed uneventfully, or at least I thought. I woke up that morning to the smell of breakfast. The kids were already running around, ready to head back outside. The day went as expected. We explored the surrounding woods and found a nearby sledding hill. We all even made an attempt to ice fish on a frozen lake, not too far from our cozy little cabin. As night fell again, we gathered for another session of board games, laughing and arguing over Monopoly deals. A perfect day ended with us all falling asleep, full of good food and wide smiles. It was in the middle of that night when I was roused by a faint, strange noise. It was a distant, ethereal sound, something between a mournful howl and a distressed cry. Was it an animal? A wolf, maybe? I was unsure, but I shook off the disturbance and drifted back to sleep, clueless about what was yet to unfold. It was the following day when the world as we knew it began to twist and distort. We noticed signs that something strange was happening. The bright expanse of snow showed signs of something large that had trampled through the night before. Unfamiliar tracks marked the land, the separation wider than any animal we knew of. When night fell, the distant noise came back, and this time it was closer. Something about it clawed at my insides. It was unsettling. The normal comforting night sounds of the cabin were drowned by that low and mournful cry. The kids heard it this time. They were pretty spooked, but we told them it was just an animal. Nothing to worry about. We had no way of knowing then, but our perfect little quiet vacation was hurtling towards a reality we never dreamed of. I decided to stay awake that night, straining to listen beyond the comforting crackle of the fire. As much as I tried to reason with myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that a malevolent force was closing in on us. The next morning, after breakfast, I got my winter boots on and decided to venture further into the woods. I spent the entire night awake listening to something out there. I figured I would at least be able to figure out what kind of creature it was, even if it was long gone by daylight. I stocked up on provisions and strapped a hunting knife to my belt, just in case. My wife had that worried crease in between her brows, and the kids were exchanging nervous glances. They knew something was off. I promised them I'd be back soon and stepped outside. Soon enough, the trail led me to a clearing that was sickly silent. Instinct pushed me forward as I walked further until my boots crunched on something that was definitely not snow. I looked down to see bone fragments scattered around. Then the smell hit me. It was a nauseating, rancid stench of flesh that was long past its expiry. Revulsion clawed at my innards. The realization hit me hard. Whatever was responsible for this grotesque display of nature gone awry was probably not too far away. I remember turning on my heel, intent on sprinting back to the cabin, and that's when I saw the true horror of the situation. At the edge of the clearing, clinging to the shadow of the trees, was a beast that I can only describe as some sort of monster. It wasn't at all like any animal that lived in the Canadian woods. It stood taller than any man I've ever seen. Its height was easily verging on 8 feet at least. 2 prominent antlers crested its skull-like head. The head seemed to be a perverse fusion of a man and a deer. There were no eyes in its empty sockets, but they seemed to have a yellow glow coming from the darkness. Its legs resembled those of an elk, but large, with appendages that hung loosely from exposed bone. The stench was emanating from it, no doubt. It was the rotting flesh on its skeletal body. In that moment, terror froze me to the spot. I mustered the will to backpedal, only for my foot to collide with the skull, sending a crack echoing through the quiet clearing. The creature turned its face towards me and my blood seemed to freeze. Our eyes met, its eyes glowing brighter, almost as if it was sizing me up. I pivoted around and broke into a run. The deafening silence of the clearing gave way to frantic, pounding footsteps echoing behind me. The cabin was in sight, and I slammed the door shut behind me, leaning on it as I tried to catch my breath. I spent the night looking out the window, watching for any sign of movement, but there was none. My family was safe and sound, tucked into their rooms, oblivious to the near catastrophe. After what felt like hours, Emily, my eldest daughter, tiptoed down to join me. She didn't ask any questions, just wrapped me in a side hug, her small form a comforting presence. Sleep never graced our eyes that night. As the first rays of sun washed upon the cabin, I finally let myself feel the relief. We'd survived, we were safe. We cut the trip short and we headed back to the city, back to the gray night studded with artificial stars and the white noise of the traffic. I wouldn't say I'd never go into the wilderness again, but I would certainly be more mindful. I reckon after this experience, I'd trade off ignorance for caution any day. This was a few years back now, probably around late September or early October. I don't remember the year right off, but I do remember I was still a teenager at the time. The location was none other than Point Pleasant, West Virginia, specifically the notorious TNT area. Yeah, I know, you've heard of it before. And it's likely that nothing good ever happens in a place nicknamed after explosives. I was there because of this dare amongst me and my friends. We were stupid teenagers back then, always trying to prove how brave we are. This particular dare involved exploring the TNT area at night. There were a ton of ghost stories surrounding the area, and one was that nobody ever comes back the same when they explore that place in the dark. I was always skeptical about urban legends, even back then, and I was never one to turn down a dare, but this time it felt a little more real. If the rest of the guys weren't all pumped up to see this place after sundown, I probably would have backed out. But I didn't have the guts to do that, and we all ended up headed down there. So there we were, a bunch of dumb kids betting on who could stay the longest in the TNT area. We all tried to scare each other with ghost stories to see who would be the first to back out. The moment I set foot in that place, it felt like another universe. It was eerily quiet, like you could hear your heart pumping in your chest. The silhouette of the leftover structures looked like remnants from a haunted past, and weirdly enough, they cast long, creepy shadows that looked like elongated monsters. I gulped and put on a brave face, all the while wishing this whole thing would end soon. Surprisingly, the moon was the only thing that seemed friendly in that grim atmosphere. Its light highlighted the wild, overgrown vegetation. But as mesmerizing as it was, the noise nearby set my senses on alert. Deep down inside, I was kicking myself for not backing out when I had the chance. But there was obviously no turning back now. As I walked further into the night, my heart beat so loud it was audible. My hand instinctively clung onto the flashlight I was holding. Its light wasn't nearly bright enough to ease my mind of the things the shadows could be hiding. My flashlight beam danced over dead logs, rusty barrels, and empty structures, while auditory hallucinations took over, and each snap of a twig sounded like something was creeping up behind me. I kept trying to reassure myself that there was nothing out there, but then my flashlight picked up on a pair of glowing red eyes. They weren't like any normal animal's eyes. They were too high off the ground and too intense. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. It was as if time had completely halted. As I tried to make sense of the situation, my trembling hand moved the flashlight upwards ever so slightly. What I saw was something I still find hard to believe. There, hanging onto a dilapidated structure's roof, was something absolutely horrifying. It was a large figure, around 5 or 6 feet in height. Its body seemed human-like, but it was covered with some black material. I'd say they were feathers if I didn't know better. In the next moment, the moonlight shone through the roof, illuminating the creature's wings. They were enormous, possibly even larger than its body was tall. They looked leathery and bat-like, completely unsuited for the human-like body it was attached to. I wish I could tell you more about the creature's face, but there was none. I mean, of course, it had a head, albeit a small one compared to its body, but it had no distinguishable facial features, just a pair of eyes, dreadfully large and red. Fear is a funny thing, you know. Sometimes it just freezes you on the spot, and sometimes it fuels you with an adrenaline rush like no other. For me, it was a mix of both. There I stood, frozen by the sight, and yet I felt this surge of energy bubbling within me. Following what felt like an eternity, my survival instinct finally kicked in. I dropped my flashlight, turned, and bolted. I didn't dare look back. My only goal was to get as far away as possible from that ungodly creature and those piercing red eyes. As I made my way out, I heard a sharp, deafening screech that echoed in the night. But then again, maybe that was just my heart hammering in my ears. I didn't stop to find out. I ran back to the safety of my friends. They had a field day with my terrified reaction until they all had their turns to face the terror of the TNT area. I won't go into their stories, but let's just say the dare was called off after only one more of us ventured in. And we all came back home with a newfound respect for local legends. To this day, those red eyes still live vividly in my memories, even though it's been years since the event. I don't spend much time hanging around spooky places anymore, but for those of you that do, I have some parting advice. Keep your wits about you. You never know when those local legends might turn out to be true. This happened a while ago when I went fishing on Lake Michigan. People hear the word lake, and they think of calm waters and good weather. But the Great Lakes are different. They're huge. They're more like inland seas, and some of the wilderness areas around them can be rugged and unforgiving. As an avid fisherman, I spent a lot of time up there. My idea of relaxation involved my trusty fishing rod, a clear day, and if I was lucky, a monstrous pike at the end of my line. That day started out perfect. Something about the hum of the water and the occasional screech of a gull was like music to my ears. Moreover, if there's one high in this world that tops them all, it's the thrill and suspense of that tug on the fishing line when you've got a big one biting. That's one irresistible high for me. I think just about every fisherman can agree with me there. I arrived at dawn, the eastern sky ablaze with red. I took my time as I pulled out my fishing gear and prepared my boat. Before the sun could even hint at its peak, I slid smoothly over the dark, glassy water. After a short while, I found the perfect spot, a quiet, calm patch of water just beyond the bay and out of the wind. I cast my line into the water with a satisfying plop and settled into the waiting game. It was a way to clear my mind and relax. I could spend countless hours out there with nothing but my thoughts and the rhythmic lapping of the water against the hull of the boat. With every minute that passed, I found myself sinking deeper into the silence, my mind relaxing with the waves. The world couldn't have been more perfect at that moment. But that isn't the reason I wrote into your channel. There was also a stirring in the air that day. It started a few hours in, a sense of unease that seeped into my tranquility. That's when things took an unfamiliar turn. I heard a sudden and unsettling low growl. I looked around but couldn't locate the source. I wasn't particularly worried since such sounds were part of the usual soundscape. There are always critters about, and I wasn't too terribly far from shore. But then it happened again, and it was louder. I felt a sudden wave of cold air come off the water, and with it came a putrid smell of something obscenely rank. It wasn't fishy. I didn't think it was coming from the lake. It was a musty, dank smell, almost like rancid garbage. The hair on my neck stood up. My skin crawled as I turned around with a sense of overwhelming dread. I saw a fleeting silhouette right at the edge of the forest where it met the lake. It was just a silhouette, but it terrified me right to the core. The beast was tall as a man, I would say. It was standing upright but hunched over at the shoulders. At first, I thought it was a bear. Black bears are pretty common around the lakes, but then I saw its eyes, and I knew it was no bear. The eyes were yellow and glowing, and worst of all, they seemed fixated on me. If I didn't know better, I would say this thing had the head of a wolf, but there is just no way that could be. Things like that didn't exist. They couldn't exist. I was totally dumbstruck. As I sat there trying to wrap my head around what I was seeing, the figure disappeared into the trees. I reeled in my line, pulled up my anchor, and made my way back to shore. I didn't think the creature was about to swim out there after me, but I just couldn't relax again on the water after seeing it. As I neared the boat launch, I had to pass by a section of forest. I completely missed the thing at first, believing it was just a pile of brush or something. It was hunched over on the banks of the river, like a dark ball of hair. I didn't put the pieces together until it stood up. It was the creature I had seen a few moments ago, but at this close range, I could see it clearer. And what I saw was nothing short of extraordinary. Its body, stark against the morning sun, appeared covered in a thick, coarse fur. From a distance, it looked black, but the creature's hair was actually a very deep brown. It was muscular, a broad chest and powerful hind legs that looked like a mixture of human and canine. But those eyes, those were a sight that I'll never forget. They glowed like a yellow fire in the morning light. The fur that cloaked its body seemed to thin out at its face, revealing an elongated muzzle. It was even more wolf-like up close. I watched, frozen in sheer awe, forgetting any fear that gripped me. There was something almost mesmerizing about its beastly stature despite the overwhelming sense of dread. I just couldn't believe what I was looking at. I think I had caught the creature off guard, because as soon as it saw me, it took off sprinting into the tree line. And suddenly it was gone. Whatever the beast was, it seemed to want little to do with me, and for that I was grateful. The encounter hasn't kept me off the water, but I do make a point to watch my surroundings. I don't mindlessly drift off into my thoughts anymore. I keep an eye out for things unknown and undiscovered, and if you spend any time out there in the wilderness, you should too. I have something I've finally decided I need to share. Even now, I can hardly believe it myself. It was a few years ago. I'd been experiencing a severe creative block. I'm an artist and painter by trade, so that made things difficult for me. After weeks of frustration, I decided to undertake a spiritual retreat. No television, no internet, just me, nature, and my art supplies. Off the grid, as they say. I felt a pull towards the Rockies. They've always been a good source for my creativity, and I thought a trip there could snap me out of my slump. I found a remote log cabin tucked away from the world, right in the depths of the mountains. I was hoping that something in the wilderness would reignite my creative spark. I existed the first few days in a pattern of peaceful solitude, exploring during the day and painting my experiences in the evening. But I was still struggling to find creative energy. So one evening, as the sun was beginning to set, I decided to go for a hike. It might not have been too smart of me to venture out alone that late, but I was there to experience the wilderness, and so I went for it. There was a specific trail that led up towards one of the high cliffs. Its towering presence almost beckoned me. I left the cabin with very little, only taking what I thought would be necessary items. I had no need for my phone or even my sketch pad. The hike was strenuous. I was gasping for breath in the thin mountain air, but there was something therapeutic tackling the mountain, one rugged step after another. And then, as the sunlight started to fade, I saw something odd. It was just a vague shadow against the encroaching darkness. Thinking it was a bear, I backed away slowly. But there was something not right about it. As I watched the figure, I could see it moving, walking upright like a man. Was there another person out here, I wondered? If there was, they were wearing a thick fur suit because this creature appeared to be covered entirely in hair. Next, I felt the sudden vibration before I heard it. It was a low murmur that seemed to emerge from the ground itself. It was a whooping call that was as much felt as it was heard. It was so loud that I could feel the echoes deep in my chest. My hands, trembling, reached out instinctively for the sketch pad that wasn't there. As the creature melted into the forest's natural darkness, its reality began to twist in my mind as I tried to make sense of and classify what I had just seen. I retreated to my cabin, the echo of the strange call still reverberating deep in my core. My mind was a whirl of heightened senses and questions. It took me a long time to finally fall asleep that night. Though I failed to bring my sketch pad on the hike, I found my fingers itching to hold a pencil, and my mind seemed to relive each detail of the encounter. The giant figure amidst the darkness, the strange call, the feeling of being observed by violent, deep-set eyes from the forest's depth, all these turned into fuel for my creative flame. For the first time in a long while, I felt alive, completely present and raw. I woke up that morning, walked over to my sketch pad expecting to capture the memories from the prior night. What caught me off guard, however, was a series of strokes already on the page, as if someone or something had already been there. In front of me was a daunting image on the page. The figure, intricate and precise, was gargantuan. The face housed deep-set eyes, a prominent forehead, wide nostrils and a flat nose, and a heavy jaw that led down to a jutting chin. The massive body was robust. My mind raced. Had I drawn this in the middle of the night while sleepwalking, or had someone or something made its way in here while I slept? The image wasn't a bear, no, it was too odd for that. And something told me it wasn't a human either. For a long moment, I just stood there, studying the drawing, far better than anything I had created in months. I was torn between being horrified that something had been in the cabin while I slept, and being amazed at the figure that dominated my sketch pad. What creature had tiptoed so silently into my cabin and breathed life onto my sketch pad with such deftness? In the following days, I scoured the nearby woods, following any out-of-place noise or unsettling movement. Paranoid or enthusiastic, I hardly slept, instead spending my nights with a blank canvas, waiting for the unseen artist to reappear. But as the days passed into weeks, the creature, my mystery artist, remained nothing more than an elusive shadow I couldn't catch. The encounter concluded with me leaving the cabin in the Rockies. My mind was a whirlpool of questions. The sketches I discovered felt like a secret message, almost like a gift that the wilderness had bestowed upon me. My artistic muse no longer lay dormant. I found a renewed vigor in my passion for painting. My encounter was not one of horror. It was enlightening. There's a deep serenity when nature interacts with us, carving out its tales on our souls. So, that's my tale for you. I hear a lot of scary stories on here, but know that not all of the world's monsters are looking to cause harm. The one I encountered certainly did not.